You wake at 2:17 a.m. The room is breathing. Not metaphorically, you can hear it. The walls tick and creak as they expand in heat that should have broken hours ago. Your phone glows. Feels like 104 degrees. Outside, nothing burns nearby, but the air tastes of smoke carried from fires you'll never see. The air conditioner hums, then clicks silent. Rolling blackouts. The grid, too, is tired. You lie there in the dark, and the thought arrives uninvited. The room itself has become the threat. Not an intruder, not a storm approaching. The setting, the container, the thing you cannot leave because it is everywhere. H.P. Lovecraft once wrote, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents." He meant it as cosmic horror, the idea that if we could see all the connections, perceive the full shape of reality, the sheer scale and indifference of it would shatter us. And perhaps that's why climate change feels the way it does, not like a disaster movie with a countdown clock and a hero, but like something older and stranger, a force we set in motion that now unfolds with a logic indifferent to the intentions that birthed it. We built this, and yet it feels as if something incomprehensible is happening to us. In cosmic horror, the terror isn't the chase scene, it's the recognition scene. The moment the protagonist realizes the landscape itself is wrong, that the architecture obeys rules they cannot fathom, that there is no villain to defeat because the threat is woven into the fabric of the world. Climate change is our cosmic horror story, not because it's supernatural, but because it's too large, too slow, too distributed across time and space to be easily seen. The monster isn't coming. The monster is the room, and the room is expanding. We didn't stumble into this blind. The science is old, older than anyone alive today. In 1824, Joseph Fourier proposed that Earth's atmosphere traps heat like glass in a greenhouse. In 1859, John Tyndall identified which gases absorb that heat. In 1896, Svante Arrhenius calculated what would happen if we doubled atmospheric carbon dioxide. The planet would warm. He thought it might take 3,000 years. It took 100. In 1958, a scientist named Charles David Keeling began measuring CO2 atop Mauna Loa in Hawaii. The number was 315 parts per million. It has risen every year since. Today it stands above 420, the highest in several million years. The curve is smooth, relentless, a signature written in the sky. After 1950, everything accelerated. Population, energy use, cement production, cars, markets globalized, factories multiplied, fire learned to count, and we taught it arithmetic at industrial scale. Satellites now measure the imbalance. Earth absorbs more energy than it radiates back into space. Over 90% of that excess heat sinks into the oceans, which store memory in their depths. Ocean heat content is at record highs. The water swells as it warms, and the ice above it thins. This is not the first time climate has restructured life on Earth. 252 million years ago, volcanic eruptions in Siberia released carbon on a scale that makes our emissions look modest. The oceans warmed, lost oxygen, turned toxic. 90% of marine species died. It was called the Great Dying. Climate, it turns out, is not a backdrop. It is a variable capable of rewriting the conditions of existence itself. And we have become a geological force, agents of what Paul Crutzen called the Anthropocene, the age in which humanity shapes the planet's physical systems. But knowledge is not the same as comprehension. Long before we had satellites and hockey stick graphs, philosophers were grappling with experiences that exceeded the mind's ability to frame them. Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant wrote of the sublime, the awe and terror we feel before something vast and overwhelming, something that humbles reason. The mountain, the storm, the infinite sky. A century later, Lovecraft gave that feeling a narrative structure, cosmic horror, where the universe is indifferent and terror arises not from malice, but from scale, from encountering something so large that human categories collapse. The philosopher Timothy Morton calls climate change a hyper-object, a phenomenon so massively distributed in time and space that we can never perceive it directly. We see effects, a heat wave, a flood, a coral reef bleached white. But the thing itself? It is non-local, sticky, phased across centuries. It clings to every object and action. It is always already here and not yet fully arrived. Rob Nixon called it slow violence, harm that unfolds gradually, dispersed across populations and generations, often invisible to the media's eye. The kind of violence that doesn't photograph well. We have been warned. Arrhenius warned us. Keeling's curve warned us. In 1988, James Hansen testified before Congress that the greenhouse effect had been detected and was changing the climate now. The warnings were not cryptic. They were precise. And yet for decades the response was a shrug, a delay, a hope that the future would be someone else's problem. The Cassandras spoke. We looked away. So why? If we knew, why didn't we act? The answer is not stupidity. It is architecture, the architecture of the mind. Human cognition evolved in a world of immediate threats, predators with eyes and teeth, rivals with motives, weather that arrived in hours. We are built to detect agents, beings with intentions. When something goes wrong, we look for someone to blame. Climate change is causally distributed across billions of actions over 2 centuries, entangled in systems so complex that no single actor controls the outcome. There is no villain with a face, and so the mind, hungry for narrative, invents one. Conspiracies, scapegoats, shadowy elites. Anything to restore the feeling that someone, somewhere, is in charge. Because if no one is in charge, the alternative is unbearable. That we are inside a system we cannot see clearly, much less steer. Then there is the availability heuristic. We overweight what is vivid and recent. A hurricane that floods a city trends for days. A steady increase in average temperatures does not. Snow in April becomes proof that warming is a hoax, because the anomaly is memorable and the trend is not. Our brains privilege the spectacular over the statistical. We suffer from scope insensitivity. One child in danger moves us. 1,000 become a number. 1,000,000 becomes an abstraction. Climate discourse is filled with staggering figures. Species lost, lives displaced, trillions of dollars, and the mind goes numb. The moral weight does not scale. Care does not multiply. It diffuses. We are also trapped by present bias. We discount future suffering steeply. The psychological distance between now and 30 years from now is vast, even when 30 years is within our own lifetime. Politicians operate on election cycles. Markets operate on quarterly earnings. The future is always losing the bidding war against today. Normalcy bias keeps us anchored to the familiar. Each generation recalibrates what a normal summer feels like. The baseline shifts, and we forget what we have lost. The drift obscures the cliff. This is compounded by system justification. If the existing order, fossil-fueled growth, car-dependent cities, cheap meat, brought prosperity, then our minds will work overtime to rationalize its continuation. To question it feels like questioning the foundations of security itself. The tragedy of the commons tells us that when costs are individual and immediate, but benefits are collective and delayed, cooperation collapses. The free rider problem whispers, let someone else cut emissions. I'll enjoy the stability they create. And so everyone waits for everyone else. Responsibility diffuses across governments, corporations, consumers, and in the diffusion, no one feels truly responsible. We mobilize against dread risks, terror attacks, plane crashes, visible enemies, but we yawn at chronic risks like heat, even though heat kills more people than most dramatic disasters. The threat that builds slowly does not trigger the alarm systems evolution gave us. And when we do pay attention, learned helplessness sets in, alarm after alarm, report after report, and the emissions keep rising. The response is never adequate to the scale. And so people oscillate between denial and doomism, 2 forms of the same avoidance. If nothing can be done, then nothing need be done. Cognitive dissonance follows. The discomfort of living a high-carbon life in a warming world produces defensiveness, rationalization, or performative guilt that changes little. Terror management theory suggests that when reminded of mortality, people cling harder to their identities and ideologies. Climate becomes culture war. Accepting the science feels like joining a tribe, and so science itself becomes suspect. And underneath all of this, the predictive brain, the engine that models the world based on past patterns, begins to fail. Weather stops behaving like it used to. Statistics grow fat tails. 100-year floods happen twice in a decade. The models we built from history are models of a world that no longer exists. Non-stationarity is a polite term for a shattering fact. The rules are changing. These biases are not flaws. They are features of a mind shaped by different pressures. But they are also inherited by institutions. Media ecosystems amplify them. Markets encode them. And so the personal becomes structural. The psychological becomes political. The walls start moving. The heat dome that settled over the Pacific Northwest in June 2021 was not supposed to happen. Temperatures in Portland hit 116 degrees. In British Columbia, entire towns recorded highs that exceeded anything in their historical record. Wet bulb temperatures, an index of heat and humidity that measures the body's ability to cool itself, briefly approach thresholds that make outdoor survival impossible. Hundreds died. Power grids buckled, roads melted. A year later, unprecedented monsoon rains submerged a third of Pakistan. 33 million people displaced. Cascading failures, crops destroyed, water supplies contaminated, disease outbreaks. Emergency systems designed for one disaster at a time could not cope. In the summer of 2023, Canadian wildfires burned with an intensity that turned New York City's sky orange. Smoke traveled thousands of miles. Air quality alerts blanketed the eastern United States. People who had never thought about particulate matter checked apps and stayed indoors. The fire was invisible. The sky was proof. That same year was confirmed as the warmest on record globally. 2024 is on pace to challenge it. Marine heat waves ripple through oceans. Coral reefs bleach white in mass die-offs that used to be generational events and are now routine. The ocean has a memory, and it is written in heat. Heat, in fact, is the quiet killer. It does not photograph as dramatically as a hurricane, but it kills more people. It reduces labor productivity. It turns nights into traps, because if the body cannot cool down while you sleep, recovery becomes impossible. Cities become ovens. The vulnerable die first. The elderly, the poor, those without air conditioning or the means to flee. Insurance companies, unsentimental calculators of risk, are pulling back. In parts of California and Florida, new homeowner policies have been paused or priced out of reach. The market is pricing in a future the politics still deny. Meanwhile, global logistics, supply chains most of us never think about, are feeling the pressure. Low water levels on the Rhine River slow barge traffic in Europe. Drought at the Panama Canal limits the number of ships that can transit. Hydrology becomes geopolitics. Food signals flicker. Droughts stress Mediterranean olive harvests. Rice exporting nations impose restrictions after climate shocks. Cocoa prices spike as extreme weather disrupts West African farms. In the attention economy, algorithms amplify both denial and doom. Both reduce agency. Both prevent clear thought. Climate becomes identity. Accepting it or rejecting it marks you as part of a tribe. And artificial intelligence now lowers the cost of generating plausible falsehoods, deepfakes, fabricated studies, bots flooding comment sections. The confusion is no longer accidental. It is industrialized. Carbon offsets promise moral absolution, pay to plant trees, fly guilt-free. But investigations keep finding the same problems. Forests that were never threatened, credits that were counted twice, reductions that never materialized, the ritual of atonement without the substance of change, greenwashing as liturgy. And then there are the big levers: geoengineering, stratospheric aerosols to dim the sun, marine cloud brightening, direct air capture, technologies that could, in theory, cool the planet or scrub carbon from the sky. They also introduce moral hazard. If we believe a techno-fix is coming, why bother with the hard work of cutting emissions? And who governs such powers? Who decides which regions receive shade and which remain hot?
The prospect of intervening at planetary scale summons governance nightmares we are not remotely prepared for. Yet there is motion. Solar and wind power have dropped in cost by more than 80% in a decade. Battery storage is scaling. Electric vehicles are no longer curiosities. Decarbonization is happening. It is real. It is also insufficient at the current pace.
The walls are moving, but so is the floor. Every solution contains a contradiction. Air conditioning keeps you alive today and strains the grid tomorrow. Adaptation and mitigation are entangled, each pulling on the other. Tug one thread, insurance, migration, food, infrastructure, and the whole tapestry puckers somewhere else. The setting, not any single scene, is the site of the struggle. Climate change is cosmic horror because it fuses human causation with impersonal consequence. We wrote the script, we cannot control the story. There is no final act where the hero confronts the monster and the credits roll. The atmosphere does not negotiate. The hyperobject does not care whether we despair or hope. It responds only to physics, and maybe that is the humility required. Cosmic horror strips us of the fantasy of mastery, the belief that the universe bends to human will, that every problem has a solution and every story has a satisfying ending. What it returns, in exchange, is the question of character. What is courage without certainty? What is care without applause or witness? Albert Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the boulder reaches the top, but because he accepts the task and chooses it anyway. Viktor Frankl spoke of tragic optimism, the stubborn commitment to meaning even in the face of unavoidable suffering. Between denial and doom lies something harder and more honest: attention, solidarity, a long patience with reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Not comfort, clarity. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. You cannot mourn what you pretend is not dying. But if you can look, if you can hold the weight without collapsing into either fantasy or paralysis, then something else becomes possible. Not a happy ending, an honest effort, not victory, integrity. The question then is not whether you can save the world. The question is simpler and stranger. What kind of ancestor do you choose to be in a story whose author is the atmosphere, whose protagonist is everyone, and whose ending will never be yours to see? The room is still breathing, the walls are still moving, and you are still here, awake in the dark, deciding what comes next.